we can begin. It's a little bit after 1. If it's okay with everybody, I'd like to start out by recapping a little bit about the story was, because we didn't get to it.
Good.
Another thought I had, I didn't write this down. You remember, well, last week I read what I thought was just that wonderful sentence in Rose family about the time not being separated by time, but the past was this great, beautiful field, that they were separated. The old men who remembered that they would dance with Miss Emily, they're separated now by only the bottleneck of the last decade of years. I thought how true that was. Another quick anecdote. Faulkner died in July of 62. In September of 62, I entered the University of Virginia. So he was gone. Now, reminiscent of what these men in the story said, imagining that they danced with Miss Emily when they didn't. I have heard no fewer than 3 of my classmates talk about how much fun it was to talk with Mr. Faulkner. I've never exposed them.
Before or after they were drinking.
Just casual conversation. I never was harsh enough to expose them at the time, but it just tickles me the way we do. But I do it too, I make myself a part of the story in order to make the story more meaningful, if I could slip it in without stretching it too far.
What year did you graduate?
I graduated in 67.
67.
Yeah, I crammed 4 years into 5.
I graduated from law school in 67.
Yeah,
I don't think our paths are across.
no.
Well, now that they're not.
I played rugby with a lot of your classmates.
So we're all close together.
I bet you did.
Gordon Rainey for one, and several others. Anyway, so starting with was, just a brief recap. This is what I sent out by email, but it's a hard copy. You don't need it, you can throw it away. Thank you. Gary. I found so much in the story was that's hilarious and poignant. I mean, nobody gets hurt, right? Nobody is deprived of anything, but it's set in the time of slavery. So that's why Uncle Buck and Uncle Buddy get so upset when Tony's Turtle predictably runs every week or every month to go to see his sweetheart over on the Beecham plantation, which is ironically named Warwick. You give it the illusion of fineness and of royalty. So it's about as dilapidated as Uncle Buck and Uncle Buddy's house, where all the slaves live while they live in the slave quarters. The reversals that are in there, they're kind of funny. And when they lock the front door and the slaves in at night, remember the slaves, they do what they're supposed to do. It's everybody living in his her stereotype. They go in, they're going to lock us in now. They lock the door and they go out, and then they go out the back window, start at the back door, do whatever they're going to do. And nobody cares. Everybody pretends that everything is normal. So the reversals that are pretty comic still accentuate the extent to which Faulkner was concerned with upheaval as a motif, upheaval within a family, upheaval within a town or a small, the Yakutoff County or Jefferson, city of Jefferson, town of Jefferson, or the South, the whole South, and thus the whole country, the whole United States of America. It was such an upheaval. And most problems, I think the cliche is you follow the money, right? Most problems follow that. There are a lot of other adjuncts, and a lot of people like to blame the the institution of slavery in the South as the cause for the war. And so it was, it's just me speaking, in its roundabout way, because it was the underpinnings of the economy of the South, which would have been doomed anyway. Anything based on slavery is never going to work because it's not efficient. You would get overtaken, whether there's a war or not. You'll get overtaken ultimately. And even George Washington saw that. One of the recent biographies that I read said that he knew that slavery, even though he owned slaves, was a very bad way to try to get things done, because there's no incentive for a slave to do any better or work harder. There's no chance for improvement, no chance to elevate himself or herself by doing a better job. And so there was no, so that's why it was so inefficient, according to what he thought. Washington. So back to the story was, what other upheavals are there in there? Anybody want to bring up? Changes. What about the idea of form versus reality, or appearance versus reality? We touched on one of these things as the story begins, with a chase beginning, and Uncle Buck is yelling, and the fox has been treed by the dogs up on the mantelpiece. Everything is total confusion, and they're racing out to go catch Tommy's turtle. Tommy's turtle was run, and he is racing around, and the Edmonds boy, who's forgetting herself, Isaac McCaslin is not the narrator, but we see the story through the eyes of Uncle Buck and Uncle Buddy's nephew. Right?
Right.
So when that nephew,
I think his name is
I think
Cass.
it's Robert Roth.
I think they call him Cass. Yeah.
Cass, that's right, okay. So Cass, yes, that's right, Cass Edmonds. He was nephew and to Buck and Buddy. So when Cass, the unnamed Cass, and they're racing around, what does Uncle Buck do before he leaves, before he jumps on the pony?
His necktie.
He gets a necktie. What's this? We're chasing down a runaway slave. What do you need a necktie for? You remember why I asked this question?
Yes, he's fun.
Because he what?
He's gonna encounter us.
He's a month, but
Yeah. And you can't call on a lady of standing without a necktie and a jacket and all sorts of other things. So there's the humorous and absurd adherence form goes through here. And even Tommy's turtle, he knows what's going to happen. He knows they're not going to catch him, and he knows in the end he's going to end up having his little holiday with his sweetheart, and then he'll come back on his own, or he'll be caught and brought back, and nobody's going to do anything. He's not going to be beaten or starved or put in solitary or anything like that. It's just, that's the way it is.
can you explain? I'm a little thrown by the scene where Cass meets up with Tommy's turtle briefly, and he says something to the effect of like, just let the women do it, and they'll get it done, or something like that.
That's right, because in Faulkner, women are the only ones who can get anything done.
Yeah.
Yeah, the men, especially the aristocratic men, are utterly useless. They can't do anything. They're so tied down with legal precedent or
And
form.
you think that's only in
Format.
Faulkner?
Pardon? Yeah, I think it's still true today.
I have a question about that. Tommy's Turtle is to say the least, an unusual name. There's got to be a story behind this name.
It's just a corruption of Terrell,
Oh,
the proper name, Terrell.
yeah, okay, or I know a T-R-E-Y-L. But,
So,
yeah,
Terrell, and
but
both races would have corrupted it. A lot of them just say Terrell.
with the Tomys part?
That's the mom. though.
Tony is the Thomasina. His mother.
I see. So we're identifying
He's,
this place in the family. I see.
Tony's child, Carol.
I see.
Thomasina's child.
So look at your genealogical chart. Tell me who is Charles father? The second page begins Tommy and over to Lucius Quintus Carruthers McCaslin.
So
So Lucius Quintus Carruthers McCaslin fathered Tommy's Churl and Tenny Beecham by the slave Tommy. So those two are half black, half white. And then Lucas Beecham, who we read about a little bit later here, is the offspring of Tommy's Churl and Tenny, who ultimately marry. Not in the story was, but soon after they marry and they have these three children.
And you're pronouncing it Beecham?
Beecham, yeah. Not Beauchamp. I mean, that'd be French, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
But the Beechams that I knew growing up corrected me when I mispronounced what
Okay.
they call it Beecham.
Something new every day.
Okay, so the reversals are there. I think sets in a humorous way begins to set forth some of the motifs, themes that Faulkner pursued all his writing career. Racism and the strongest of his characters being strongest of the strong are the black women, and women in general and blacks in general were the strongest of his characters throughout. I guess I might be wrong in one way. It's not to say that there are no, say, Caucasian or white people who succeed or who have any moral value at all. It's just to say that they are the strongest characters. They, the women, and the African Americans. I may sound like I'm insisting on, I don't mean to insist on anything, my opinions, but that was what came out of my examination and my chatting with people who know a whole lot more than I do. Okay, so in the end, what the story was, why do you think Faulkner has the fate of certain people being determined by a card game played by others? Hubert says to Uncle Buck something like, "She got you now. She really got you now." You went into her bedroom at night, got in the same bed with her. He didn't know he was doing it. And maybe they've been drinking or maybe not. Yes?
Just to mention, Teresa has her hand up.
Oh, sorry.
Hey, Bev, hey, everybody. I'm joining a little bit late, but I think that a lot of the decisions that are made by the enslaved individuals come about because they have no freedom. So in order to have some control over their life, they make decisions that maybe don't make great sense, but for them, it's exerting a little bit of control. And again, that's overarching, that doesn't specifically address the situation, but that's how I thought about it.
A good point about control and who's in control, as in the story arose for Emily. Who's in control in that story? Who's in control in Rose for him?
Emily is, isn't she? She's controlling the mechanisms of the town, utilizing the their Southern traditions
Right.
to exert that control.
even as a dead woman, she's still, everybody is still sort of kowtowing to the image that she put forth and what she represented to them. They make their own, they make themselves prisoners, but, you know, they don't have to do that, but they do it anyway. As I Lay Dying is a later novel, is one of his earlier novels, but after The Sound and the Fury it's the journey of the Bundren family, I got the name right, taking Addie Bundren, who is now dead at the beginning of the story, all the way back in this long trek to bury her where she ought to be buried. And there's a lot of hilarity in that and a lot of sort of tragic comedy. They go through flood, fire, pestilence, and famine to get her back to burial place, and for what purpose? Okay, so back to Was. I think that the humorousness of it is juxtaposed with the seriousness and the tragic nature of Pantaloon and Black, where pantaloon, I always thought of pantaloon as a piece of clothing, but I checked, it means a stupid man.
Oh,
Not
that's
a
the
man.
title. Yeah, I didn't understand.
I never knew that, because pantaloons, that's something from those zouave soldiers wore, they sort of billowy, and it's sort of a lady's undergarment, isn't it?
Mhm.
Or maybe it's no, I mean, we don't see them anymore much.
It's the baggy pants that the clown wore
Oh, okay.
in Italian comedies,
Yes.
That's where,
in like the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. And so they named the pants after the clown.
for the genealogy, I mean, for the
Exactly.
etymology. So the one story is lighthearted and very funny with a serious undertone. The Pantaloon and Black story is not lighthearted at all. And it has no undertones of humor, except when you think you might laugh sardonically at one of these characters, like the deputy and his wife. But I'm sort of getting mixed up here because you've got the lightheartedness on one side, the serious and tragic on the other, and in between we've got Lucas Beecham and George Wilkins and the out-of-towner and the gold and the still and the confrontation way in the past between Lucas and Roth Edmonds. What was that all about? About,
Molly.
yes, about Molly. And what about her?
Well, getting her to come home, because he thought she was having one with Roth Edmonds.
Right, and when she was really there to look after the child that was born, because the mother died. And to emphasize that, looking at my chapter,
So she was taking care of two children.
right,
Was one of them hers with?
yeah,
Okay, so she didn't have a child with the white owner.
no,
Okay,
but Lucas is afraid that it might be.
Yeah, there's someplace in there.
she's got her
Doubts.
own child.
Yeah, and that's what ultimately causes this violent confrontation between the two, which takes on a certain amount of comic. See, as Lucas confronts Roth while Roth's in the bed, but they're going to go through the formality of dueling and pistols to settle it, and then they get to arguing about the process, and then they have their fight. Anyway, and nobody gets hurt, but it's a serious issue, of course, and I was looking for this. Well, there was something early on in the story where, in that flashback, where Lucas either thinking to himself or saying to himself, how can a black man ever tell a white man not to come in to his house in order to take his wife carnally? And even if the white man said, okay, I won't do that, who would believe it? I mean, what black man with an attractive wife or a wife that might be seen attractive to a white owner, how can he be sure that the white slave owner would do what he said he'd do? And that's sort of what drives him. I think Lucas Beecham is a really admirable person. He is the most hubristic character. He goes his own way. He doesn't pay a bit of attention to form or substance unless he wants to. And one of the most beautiful is the wrong word, one of the most devastating cusses you could ever lay on somebody without using profane or vulgar language occurs in my book here. This is after the sheriff had brought Lucas in, sort of, part way into the story. And it reads, I think the sheriff and Lucas are sitting there in the jail or in the sheriff's office or something like that. And there's a report that's come in. It said the report would have come from Edmonds, the white man, because to the sheriff, Lucas was just another nigger. And both the sheriff and Lucas knew it. Although only one of them knew that to Lucas, the sheriff was a redneck without any reason for pride in his forebears or any hope for it in his offspring. I have stolen that whenever I wanted to denigrate somebody. That's about the worst thing you can say about someone. No reason for pride and no hope for it. So, but Lucas moves his own way now. So somebody wants to take a stab at the summary about the still and the gold and all that and the divorce. Or, a question about it, a comment about why it's in there. Molly wants a divorce. Why does she want a divorce? She doesn't really want one, but she's going to do it anyway because
he won't stop going hunting for gold with his
Yeah.
metal detector.
thinks he got gold fever.
Well, not only is he obsessed with it, now his son-in-law has an obsession, and I think above all, she doesn't want her daughter to have to live through what she's living through.
Exactly. And that's pretty poignant. I mean, that's a heartfelt, that's a sincere concern she's got. And it doesn't come because she's not educated or she's too ignorant to know. She knows exactly what's going on here. Here's somebody who was afflicted with gold fever or whatever this. Of course, he gets over it, and that's part of the humor of the story, because what happens in the end with the idea about the gold mine.
He gives it up, right?
Yeah,
But he's given an opportunity to go out occasionally, and he says, no, just get rid of it.
yeah.
He doesn't want it around, he doesn't ever want to do it again.
He doesn't want that, but he's also fooled people. And there's no treasure there, right? There is no real treasure.
Well, there's the apocryphal story about the two white men who dug up $22,000.
Right.
And everybody knows it's true, but everybody says they know it's true, but you get the impression that it really isn't true because there's no evidence of it.
Right. Because we know Captain Kidd's treasure, we know it's somewhere up there near Newport, Rhode Island, or we know it's there. Or we know it's out near St. Lucia or whatever. People go looking for it and can't find it. Same way with this. And then there's, am I misremembering, or didn't Lucas go out and salt in quotations, the area
With the silver.
with silver to fool people,
Fool the white guy.
It sounds,
fool the white guy? I just, when I read Faulkner, I don't laugh out loud often, but when I go back and reread it and think about what was going on, some of the stuff really is hilarious. I can't say that about Hemingway. I don't think there's anything very funny or humorous. I love Hemingway stuff, but I don't think there's much humor except gallows humor in him. But in Faulkner, there's a lot of belly slapping humor right along with the tragic and the painful. There's that mixture of the two. And for Faulkner, the love-hate relationship he's got with his roots, the South. And he loves a lot of things, and people in particular, whites, blacks, and hates other certain things about it. The map that I showed you last meeting has shows where Frenchman's Bend is in the, I think it's the upper left-hand corner. This is not a quiz, no.
That's
So
good.
that's where a lot of the no good nicks were. Yes.
Hey, Bev,
Another
so Cheryl just mentioned in the chat, she said in Faulkner's novel, The Unvanquished, young Bayard,
Sorry.
yep, quotes his father, the colonel, as saying this about Uncle's Buddy, Buck and Buddy. There was more to Uncle Buck and Buddy than just that. Father said they were ahead of their time. He said they not only possessed, but put into practice ideas about social relationship that maybe 50 years after they were both dead, people would have a name for.
Called emancipation. Yeah, they sort of had emancipated their slaves in that comic way that we were just talking about earlier. Even though slavery, this is before the Civil War, before emancipation, they lived in the slave quarters, they put the slaves there. Well, you'll see themes of guilt and ownership and incest and all this between whites and blacks coming back through the novel, Go Down Moses. And that's, I'm glad you pointed that out. I'd forgotten about that altogether, that they were seen by some others as being ahead of their time. If you pursue, if you read the rest of Go Down Moses in the last story or the next to last story, where Ike comes into contact with an African-American woman, maybe mostly white, maybe 3/4 white, and she is trying to find the father of her illegitimate child, a baby she has with her. And Ike can't deal with it. And he says to her something like, yes, you've got the right pursuit, but not now. Not now. Not now. Can't do it now. You're going to have to wait until things change, until time passes, and this can be seen as something you can pursue without endangering yourself and your infant son. Anything in this story that's anything else that might be bothersome to people, like why is it in there? I don't think there's anything that Faulkner included that should not be there, that does not serve a purpose.
I was a little confused about Buddy being an ace at cards being much better than Lucas, or not Lucas, the other featured guy.
Hubert.
The Buck.
Buck and Buddy, Amadeus and Theophilus.
Yeah.
The names are comical. Pretensions towards aristocracy. And then Hubert Beecham is
Yeah.
the guy who loses at the cards.
Okay, so all right, did Buddy win?
He didn't tell you that, but nothing happens. Later on, Stefansova and he Buck do marry, as we showed in the genealogical chart. But not in this story, even though he has really compromised himself by seeking to compromise an innocent virginal woman who's in her 60s. I'm thinking she's that old, but maybe she's only in her late 40s or something, but she's not a young,
But they had a child, right?
they did.
And so I would think
Miracle
she'd
of
be-
miracles, yes.
Well, she would have 60 then.
60. I don't think.
Probably not.
No, not unless she'd already had another child.
Well, the chart might give a date for her, I don't know, but I think that she's not a 20-something. She's not 20 or 30, she's much older than that.
In those days, if you hit 25 and you weren't married, you weren't old age.
Yes, a lot of that. But the men, a lot of times the men, or at least the professional men would wait because we didn't have what we know as 30-year mortgages back then. They didn't have those for credit. So if you want to buy a house, you pay it up front, or you get a 2-year loan from the bank or something. And so a lot of men, unless they inherited money, couldn't afford to marry. I think, all right, but tell me if I'm wrong about that.
I don't
I
see.
just struggle reading,
No.
but absolutely right about the ladies, especially in the South.
So, I mean, she could have been 30 or 40 and they would have thought she was ancient
Yeah.
That would be old.
and decrepit.
And maybe that's part of the humor too. She's an old maid and she's only 32 or 3 years old. The dreaming about gold is what drives Lucas. But he's too smart not to figure out that he's going all wrong after a while. I mean, to my way of thinking, he's a whole lot smarter than that white guy that he fools. And he's smarter, more savvy than George Wilkins. Not to say George Wilkins doesn't have a good brain and all that, but Lucas in the story is revealed to us is much more in control of things than I might have thought he was. He's touched with gold fever, but he soon overcomes that and he sees a way out. And then there's the business of the still. And still, until I was in college, I naively thought that the stills out in the mountains, and especially in the deep South or in Appalachia, there were just ways for people to make whiskey that they could drink themselves. But it wasn't that. It was it was a livelihood. It was an incredibly important source of income for a lot of these people, notwithstanding what Robert Mitchum and Thunder Road had to say about it. And the reason that I make that comment is that when my father moved us to Greene County, Virginia, which is a little bit north and slightly west of Charlottesville, when he became founding headmaster of Blue Ridge School, boys boarding school, it was Appalachia. I mean, I saw harvesting with mule and plow. Didn't have any tractors. Nobody commuted. It was only 25 miles to Charlottesville, but nobody didn't have the means of transportation. A lot of inbreeding, a lot of poverty, illiteracy. There's any number of young, able, perfectly smart, but uneducated farm boys who'd like to found a way out of there, but they flunked the Army induction test. They couldn't even pass the test to get in the draft because they're just illiterate. That was an eye opener to me. And so the first week when our family had moved from Tidewater, Virginia to this area, in the first week, one of the maintenance staff cut a guy in a drunken brawl one night. He did this about once a week, I found out later. Another guy intentionally ran a guy down in his car and almost killed him. And a third incident, right out the gates to the school, about 150 yards to the left, was a little service station that sold Hostess Twinkies and junk. You You can imagine what it looked like in 1962, like it came out in 1930. And a guy shot and killed a man with a .22 rifle because he was skimming, the terminology eludes me now, but he was skimming some of the froth off the man's still and selling it, stealing it. So this fellow shot and killed him. Welcome to the neighborhood. You know, it's pretty daunting to think, well, here we are.
What was the student draw for that school?
The students,
Where did they come from?
it was all boarding, most of them, and because it started, was a startup, they weren't gonna have any applicants from students who could make it at, St. Peter, St. Paul, or Woodbury Forest School, or, Gilman School, or anything like that. They were gonna get a lot of cast-offs. And, so a couple of years in, maybe 3 years in, my father thought, well, let's make the philosophy of this school for average students. We could use that term in those days, IQ. So we shoot for an average IQ of between 100 and 105. Those tests are flawed, of course, in a lot of ways. In some ways, they're not. So that was what saved the school. That it was the only school in the country for a long time that catered to that level of student. The student who was perfectly smart, but who had reading disabilities that we didn't know about in the early 60s, or hadn't diagnosed them or recognized them, or other sort of learning problems. And so there was a very close hands-on nurturing of those students, and the school went from opening it with 67 boys to an enrollment of about 235 by the time in 1984 when my parents retired. I didn't mean to go on about my parents, but you asked about the school. So, yeah, and it stayed committed to that purpose. So they don't want to see a lot of people that we know are going to be national merit finalists. It's not what they do. And other schools have followed that. So I made the comment about education here because formal education, you know, how much did Faulkner have? I mean, he went through high school or whatever they called it in those days. But he didn't, he entered the University of Mississippi, but dropped out after a week or two or a month or two. So he never did anything. Born in 1897, so he would have entered college at about just before World War I, right? It would have been about 1913, 15, something like that. So then when the war was on, he went up to Canada to join the the Royal Canadian Air Force, and did. And I don't know, I don't think he ever got his wings, but he said he did, and he used to walk around Oxford in his uniform. Just like people do today, right? Yeah. Oh, I was there, they were firing bullets at me, and then you see somebody coming down a red carpet from the helicopter or the airplane. No bullets at all, or all the fabrications that go on. So he was right in there with the best of them. Doing what he could to furbish his image and embellish his own living.
To go back to those stills that you were talking about, and not just for their own consumption. The Whiskey Rebellion in Western Pennsylvania deals with exactly that, because the farmers out there were turning their corn harvest into whiskey.
Right.
Because it was so much easier to ship to market than huge wagon loads of corn.
Yeah.
And
So it
they
costs
could
less.
just, yeah, it cost less,
It didn't cost.
and the volume was so much less, and they could ship it to market and still make a profit from their crop.
And wasn't that during Washington's time? I mean, this is the late 1700s.
Gosh,
I don't know. Does
my
that-
husband would give you an exact date, because he has all the stamps from the
Well,
Whiskey Rebellion.
It was a
that they
long,
were-
long time ago, long before Prohibition. I mean, this is way back.
Yeah, I thought it
I thought it was before the Revolutionary War.
was that
You're
pre-revolution?
probably right.
And, well, Washington was running around that area as a surveyor.
1791.
Oh, okay,
Yeah, well,
so that's
right.
post-Civil War.
1791 and ended in 1794 during the presidency of George Washington.
Oh, all right, very good.
So, but yes, livelihood could be made, and because it was so productive for the federal coffers to tax it. The taxes made it harder. People didn't want to pay the taxes, most of them being, I believe, indigent or near indigent. You know, they weren't, we're not talking about Al Capone. We're talking about bucolic, uneducated people who are trying to eke out a living for the most part. And then it was only later on when, during Prohibition, when the illegal, the criminals seized the opportunity to sell bootleg whiskey because nobody could sell it legally. But up until then, it was legal, and then afterwards, so, what's the Volstead Act? 1919?
Yeah.
1919.
My husband would give you exact dates on this.
Then
And
My history's.
the,
repealed in
the stamps that are used for that, he will tell you the precise date on which each of those were issued and when they were rescinded. But yeah, that was all.
October of 1919.
Yeah, and that was repealed around 1933, I think, something like that.
Yeah,
Anyway,
something like
a little bit
that, yeah.
off the topic.
But this was, yeah.
So
But there were ways of getting alcohol. He has a bunch of prescription blanks written on Tillman Island that he has managed to find. You know, you go to the doctor, oh, I'm feeling terrible, I really need something for this, so I'll prescribe you a pint of whiskey.
Yeah.
And so, or the ladies wanted to have a party, they each go to their doctors, maybe it's the same doctor, and they each get a pint, and then they all bring it to the garden party. So yes, there was some alcohol around.
So I had a random thought about Lucas as I was reading this, that had he been white, he would have been a very successful businessman. He was ruthless. He wanted to get George arrested before he found out he was married to his daughter. He was a horse trader bar none. He was very admirable in terms of his acumen of how to get ahead
Yes.
within the framework of the life he was doomed because of the color of his skin.
Yeah, so he,
You've been rich.
He would have been rich.
yeah, so he was very enterprising, very, very capable, but blocked, hamstrung by the trappings of slavery, the structures and all that, and then the discrimination against any blacks getting formal education, even in slavery, even learning to read and write,
Yeah.
was a cause for punishment if discovered. When Lucas and Zach Edmonds back in Old Carruthers McCaslin, who had sired him, Lucas, and Zach Edmonds both, just set the genealogy. Then a couple of pages later, Lucas is talking. He's talking with Zach. Zach says to him, he's accosted because of the accusation. Zach says, so that's what you think. What kind of a man do you think I am? What kind of a man do you call yourself? Lucas responded, I'm a nigger. Lucas said, but I'm a man too. I'm more than just a man. The same thing made my pappy that made your grandma. I'm going to take her back, talking about his wife. I'm taking my wife back. Edmund said, by God, I never thought to ever pass my oath, but I will swear. Lucas had already turned, leaving away. It wasn't worth it to him. Not to me, Lucas said, I want her in my house tonight. You understand? He turns and goes back to the field and the plow and so forth. He just walks away. So he has had the, he understands what motivates people. He can see the agenda, or the agenda behind the agenda. And he knows what he's dealing with here, dealing with Zach Edmonds, and he knows there's enough guilt in that family to where he can say, look, my sire way back is the same one that sired your side. Don't you treat me this way. I don't care what the color of my skin is.
But
You're not getting away with this.
But he's better because it comes from his father's side and not his mother's side.
Exactly, right. Not to the distaff, right. Made that point, that, because Edmonds is not named McCausland, he's named Edmonds. And Lucas Beecham has come down through the McCausland side as a result of Kenny and Tony's Turtle, who was also half white and half black. All right, so we can get real confused. a lot of this stuff in here. And there's a lot of sort of maundering that goes on here, where there's a lot of description and a lot of real, loose, sentences that go on for a couple of, more than 2 or 3 lines. They just go on and on and on. Part of that's the storytelling process that most storytellers will fall into, because if we haven't thought out a story, an extemporaneous account, I don't know, you have somebody some friends over for dinner, let me tell you about the time, or let me tell you what happened last week with this, that, and the other, then you go back and forth, and you get, as someone was saying earlier, you can't get through, what was your metaphor? I can't tell you what time it is till I tell you how the watch was made. I'm going to use that on these long-winded friends of mine who can't ever get this. So that's part of what's going on here. See, what's something else? Why do you think Faulkner wanted to call it the fire and the hearth? Why not the fire and the fireplace? Why call it not a fireplace at all?
I think that increases the intimacy of the marital union, and the fire started that you traditionally started at your wedding night, you would continuously keep going. And so the fire and the hurt, like the symbolism of fire, like at the Olympics, how they have that the torch, and how that's supposed to be significant. And the hearth is also where Lucas buried his money secret. So I think it's to emphasize how sacred matrimony is supposed to be. And I don't blame Lucas at all for suspecting Zach of sleeping with Molly, even if he didn't, because of his own parentage that you just that you pointed out, Bev, when you read that quote about Lucas is from the distaff and Zach is from the sister line.
Yeah, exactly. He has every reason to be very, very suspicious, if not incorrectly convinced that Molly has been cohabiting with Zach, which she has not. But it wouldn't be unusual. It would be almost the usual order of things if Zach Edmonds were so inclined.
But it wouldn't have been cohabiting.
Pardon?
It wouldn't have been cohabiting. I mean, Zach
Yeah,
would
that's the
have,
wrong word.
would have been forcing that.
Right. Yeah. So the fire and the hearth, it's not the fire and the fireplace. Right? Hearth has other, as Cheryl was pointing out, has much gentler and say warmer, no pun intended, warmer connotations than the word fireplace. Fireplace is just something that's what you call it. But a hearth has family and it's warmth in winter, and you cook over it, and the family has its has its meals there, or tells its stories there, and hangs its Christmas stockings there. So there's a lot going on there with the word. And as Cheryl pointed, says in the story, it never, when Lucas lit the fire, it never went out. I mean, even in July and August, the fire was still, you had still a little bit going. It was just emblematic of the consistency and the undying love that he has for Molly.
But was that a tradition throughout the South or throughout the United States at that point?
It's my understanding that it was in the South, but
Pardon?
it's my understanding that it was in the South, although that's not true of my grandparents who were born in the late 1800s. And there wasn't a fire going when I visited him. I'm really old.
Yeah, but keep in mind that it wasn't all that easy to start a fire in those days either. If, people didn't have Zippo lighters and matches even. A lot of people started fires with flint and sparks and kindling. And so it was a practical reason to keep a fire going day and night, so you didn't have to start all over again from scratch.
Exactly. And there were those instruments for carry. You had to borrow hot coals, carry hot coals in a container with a long stick on it, so you could go from one place to the next. I know I read that in some English novels way back when, carrying the coals. And I've seen those. I don't know what you call them, but they look like something that you might bake something in, except they got a long handle on them, and it's for carrying a hot coal from the fire that's going to the people whose fire has gone out. So they can't, have an easy way to start it, get the sticks out. I've never tried to do that. Anybody know how to do that?
It's pretty hard.
I think it must be awfully hard. So in the end, when the divorce is not pursued, and what's it? I'm trying to remember the words. There's a little bit of deal making that goes on, right? It's called part 2 of chapter 3. Lucas says, she wants a boast. Lucas said, all right. All right, Edmund said, all right. Yes, what's it going to cost me? I see, Edmund said. If you got to pay out money for it, she can't have one. Well, this is one thing you ain't going to swandangle anybody out of. You ain't buying or selling a gold finding machine either now, old man. She don't want any mute. She can have it. Lucas said, I just want to know how much it will cost me. Why can't you declare as boast like you've done Oscar and that yellow slut he fought out here from Memphis last summer? You not only declared them boast, you took her back to town yourself and bought her a railroad ticket back to Memphis. Edmund says, because they were not married very hard. And sooner or later, she was going to take a lick at him with that razor she carried. And if she ever missed or fumbled, Oscar would have torn her head off. So he's justifying this, that, and the other. But they're sort of a humorous back and forth, I thought, between these two guys as they're sort of sparring, like two boxers who never throw a punch, but keep circling and feinting. And then Lucas later on says, well, Edmund said, 2 nights a week, you'll have to start that next weekend because some of your cotton is ready. He turned to the old woman, Molly. There, Aunt Molly. 2 nights a week and he's bound, even Lucas, to come to his senses soon. I don't access him to stop hunting but 2 nights a week, she said. She hadn't moved, speaking in a monotonous sing-song or looking at neither of them. I don't access him to stop hunting for it at all, because it's too late now. He can't help himself now, and I got to be free. Lucas later on, I'm going to be the man of this house, Lucas said. It was not stubborn, it was quiet, final. His stare was as steady as Edmund's was, and immeasurably colder. Listen, Edmund says, you're getting along. You ain't got a lot more time here. You said something about father a minute ago. All right. But when his time came and he laid down to die, he laid down in peace because he never had anything. Jesus, he had almost said it aloud. Damn, he thought. Had anything about his wife in her old age to have given. So, and then we lapsed into a quotation. I'm not sure where it ends. It's not very clear. So there's the confrontation between Lucas and Molly in front of Zach, and which leads ultimately to the quiet agreement that they're going to observe as they move forward. There, very end of this right before I went black. As somebody was saying a moment ago about getting rid of the thing that's dogging their progress, the very last paragraph, no, Lucas said, get rid of it. I don't want to never see it again. Man has got 70 years on this earth, the book says. He can want a heap in that time, and a heap of what he can want is due to come to him if he just starts in soon enough. I done waited too late to start. That money's there. Them 2 white men that slipped in here that night 3 years ago and dug up $22,000 and got clean away with it before anybody saw them. I know. I saw the hole where they filled it up again. And the churn it was buried in. But I am near to the end of my 70, and I reckon to find that money ain't for me. So I thought it was kind of funny that he knows what he's saying isn't, I believe he knows what he's saying isn't accurate and true. He knows there ain't any gold there. But he's saying it's there, it's just too late for me. So I'm not gonna do this anymore. I know it's there, but I'm not doing it anymore to save face equity in front. You go and look for it if you want to, but it's too late for me. And I saw those white men. I know it was there because I saw the hole where they dug it up. I didn't see the gold, but I saw the hole. And then they filled it back in again. I saw that too. What more proof do you want? And the churn that was buried in the, I guess that's a butter churn. You saw that. Empty churn. Well, there it is. That's what they put it in. What more proof do you want? So I find it hilarious, and I don't think this is Faulkner for a second making fun of a black man who doesn't have any formal education. That's my thought. I don't think, did anybody get that idea? Maybe that he had a sardonic attitude, because who comes out on top is Lucas. He's in more control than anybody in this whole story.
And he's got 3,000 in the bank.
That's right. He's smart enough for that, and clever enough, and he's honest. He didn't come by ill-gotten, it's not ill-gotten means. And there's all this business about the divining machine. I've seen somebody divine before. I didn't believe it,
Did it work?
but it worked
What, was they looking for water?
out in Appalachia, Virginia. Greene County, Virginia. Divining, it's not just anybody who can do it.
Yeah, I thought they used to stick for that, not a machine.
Use a forked peach
Yeah.
twig, 2 forks, and then you go and finally it'll, there's a point down. Yes, I still don't believe it. What is it? Believe my lying eyes or what somebody's telling me?
Is that called dowsing?
Yes.
No, that. D-O-U-S-I-N-G, dowsing.
I think it's
D-O-W, that's W.
D-O-W-S-E, downs. So Pantaloon in Black, not a funny story at all. And I think that Faulkner used it after the first two stories, which have a lot of good humor in it, a lot of belly slapping humor, and the poignancy of serious themes about of racism, incest, and concerns, and not just a lot of maunderings about who I am, ontological maunderings, I think somebody called it, sitting around wondering who I am, which is what Ike does all his life. He never had his children. Remember that first line? Isaac McCaslin, Uncle Ike, father to no one, but uncle to half a county or something like that. Because everybody called him Uncle Ike. So he spends his life trying to sort of figure it out in a way to try to figure out how he can atone for it. But his trouble, like Hamlet, is he thinks too much. He doesn't do anything. He sits there and worries about it and thinks a lot. So Pantaloon in Black, what are some immediate reactions to that story?
I get really from by now. Remember, like, there's no way to express his grief. It seems like that's driving all of his actions. But he's really unable to articulate it.
Yes, I agree. And that's true often of many bereaved people, isn't it? Especially with an unexpected loss, a sudden unexpected loss, which we're seeing all the time. I can't remember what are the stages. There's disbelief, denial. How does it go? Negotiation, bargaining.
Depression.
Finally, acceptance, if you can get there.
This is one of excuse me, Faulkner's understanding of human psychology is, so not just race relations, but his understandings of human psychology are what make him my favorite author. The first DSM wasn't published until like the 1950s, but prior to that, Faulkner is already describing stages of grief, manic depression, narcissism. He didn't have the labels because those hadn't been established yet, but he's clearly writing about, especially in this story, someone just like ravaged by grief and unable to cope and self-medicating through an excess of alcohol.
Yeah, I agree completely. And glad to know Faulkner's your favorite. That makes us cousins.
So I think in this story, Faulkner's writing is so much more straightforward than in the convoluted was or the other one that we get this summer. I appreciate that. I in fact find the convolutedness of some stories obnoxious. I feel like it's sort of abusive to the reader to try to make you.
It almost distracts from the story. Well, because you're reading and you're constant, or for me, I was constantly thinking, now wait a minute, who is this character and what's the relation? Yeah, whereas this was just a story and the grief that the man felt, and I mean, he'd been married 6 months and his wife was young. There was such love and then such a horrible loss. There was, to me, so much more feeling in this particular story. I mean, we could be reduced to tears reading it.
Oh, I agree. It's very moving. Everybody's heart goes out to Ryder for that tragic loss. We don't know anything about that,
Right.
why it's come about. And I was sort of idly wondering, why didn't Faulkner tell us about that? Because it's not important.
Right,
The story doesn't matter. You can wonder about it, but it doesn't matter what it was when she was she got sick and died, or she got hit by a cotton wagon, or something.
Something sudden.
The fact of the loss is what Faulkner is trying to have us focus on, I think, and the effect of the loss on the state of mind of Ryder and of others.
What did you say pantaloon means? Not the pants, but the other, a buffoon or something?
Yeah,
Yes,
an old, weak.
yeah, I had
An old weak buffoon, and yet that doesn't,
I'm not getting the
Apply it
connection
all.
between, so who is buffoon or pantaloon?
well, a good question. Who is? It's certainly not Ryder.
I know, so I've lost the track of just
The
even
guy
a
who
few
wears
names.
the nice game, maybe, or the deputy, yeah.
no, it's
Oh,
not
the-
black, it says the
The
black.
deputy
No,
don't qualify.
But maybe it's not in black, like being
Like,
black
I-
or wearing black.
I
It's
thought the
a black
black
situation.
Yeah.
I got this from
Oh,
Bloom's literature. What's his first name?
Harold?
There are two. Which one's a scholar? Anyway, he wrote, the pessimism of pantaloon and black counterbalances the optimism of the fire and the hearth. A pantaloon is a foolish old man, or the butt of a clown's jokes. So that goes right to the sort of the end of the story, to the white sheriff. What does the white sheriff think about Ryder? What do his utterances to his wife reveal about his attitude towards Ryder?
Well, just how ignorant he is about grief. I mean, he doesn't care. I mean, it's just, it is a tragedy to see the sheriff so completely unmoved by this gentleman. And I think it also speaks to people as a whole don't know what to say about grief and don't really handle it all that well. Again, I only read the story once, so that's my brief interpretation of it.
I think it's right on.
yeah,
Right on.
and more than, not having an understanding, he didn't even have empathy. He totally lacked
I think that back then, certain people didn't think black people even had emotions that were
Right.
part of the white experience, you know, the
Parts
full
of the
range
white.
of what's available to us, because they didn't have the whatever tools.
Yeah, their own epistemological methods are so constrained and limited.
Yeah.
They can't imagine that an African American at that time could have feelings. I mean, you find that in the Adventure of Huckleberry Finn, where Huck says, where's the effect of when he overhears Jim crying, sobbing about his poor little Elizabeth and poor little Joe.
Death daughter, yeah.
And Huck says to us, well, it didn't seem natural that a black guy could have these kinds of feelings, but I reckon he really did. So Huck's 12-year-old white attitudes are so limited by what he's been taught, what he's been exposed to around, at least among the white community, has led him to believe that slaves are just, blacks are just different. They're not really human beings. The same thing here. Somebody just pointing out. The sheriff, you can't see him as anything different from a stove or a doorstop. You know,
Well,
just,
but he also even tells his wife they have 42 votes, the Birdsong family.
exactly.
42 votes. And he might not get elected sheriff next year if he doesn't let them take him out and lynch him.
Right.
It's
Really, really dark.
It's just dark.
It's dark, but it's the reality. Excuse me. Sorry, guys. It's the reality, and that's what Faulkner was brave enough to explore, right? To bring this to the forefront. He was a white man in Oxford, Mississippi, writing this one. Bev was published 1940 after Mammy Callie died. So he couldn't say I am pro desegregation because he had racists in his family, but he could write narratives that had black characters as intelligent as whites, and whites who behaved as poorly as everyone of his contemporary time thought that he crossed the characteristics to show the equality of nature.
I agree.
I was struck by how much the sheriff's comments sounded like when you read about people being railroaded in investigations, how much there seems to be that attitude of they didn't act like I expected them to act, therefore they must be guilty.
Yeah.
You hear that so often in like murder cases where it later comes out that they were just completely railroaded because the person laughed when they heard about it, or the person went to work instead of staying home and grieving, you know, or that kind of thing. And I think he's really nailed that attitude of authorities that if the people don't act like I expect them to act, well, that's a sign of guilt. And that just chilled me.
Yeah. So if you don't lapse, if you lapse into your people will try to make you lapsing into your stereotype in order to pronounce judgment one way or another, usually guilty. We're not interested in innocence. We're interested in guilt, right? Suffering, pain. That's what sells newspapers. Bad news, good news doesn't sell. Right? Bad news is what sells. The utterance of the deputy, and it's worth mentioning in passing, Faulkner doesn't give the deputy a name. Ryder has a name. So.
He doesn't deserve a name.
I agree.
I think he's supposed to represent every man in the white community, and that's why he doesn't have a name.
Well, that's a good point, yeah. He's representative of the stereotypical attitudes that prevailed in small town, deep south in the 19th century. And maybe today, in pockets, they're still fighting the war.
You know, that's what I love about Faulkner. He was viewed as a wastrel, a loser. And when he went to New Orleans, he had no real job and he stayed at other people's homes. But during that time, he was just soaking up life. And the way he took life and he created stories, it's absolutely amazing. And I know that many of the stories wander around and are convoluted, but boy, they're just so powerful. You can, from a superficial level, and that's the kind of reader I am right now. I get so many things, yet upon a second reading, there are so many more things to discover. He's so complex, and he attacks the race issues so subtly that you identify with the underdog, who happens in this case to be the black man or the black woman, and you realize just how foolish the prevailing attitudes are. And he's just so subtle about it. I love it. He pulls you over to his side with skill and not cunning, but such a premeditated view of his writings. I can't get enough of him. And like Cheryl, he is one of my favorite authors, though I'm perplexed every time I read him.
Well said. I think there's a lot to be said about the objective approach that Faulkner does. He doesn't come out and make these stories allegories where all the blacks are all good and all the whites are all bad and everybody symbolizes a virtue or a vice. He puts together situations that are believable, seem realistic enough. It may not be very realistic that there's buried gold somewhere, but it is realistic that people will believe there is, or will believe in superstition and so on. And so he set out, and we can draw our own conclusions about what he's dramatizing. And And as I think Cheryl, somebody was saying earlier about Shakespeare or about Faulkner, Cheryl was saying about Faulkner and his understanding of human nature, that he wasn't a psychologist. He didn't take psychology in college, did he? But he seemed to have this depth of understanding. That's the way I think, from what I've read about from the history of Shakespeare's writings, that's what he has demonstrated. Shakespeare demonstrated just an incredible knowledge of what motivates human beings, characters, love, hate, jealousy, all the passions that come to bear. Maybe another time we can see if anyone believes Edward de Vere wrote all that stuff.
It'll be a long hour.
Yeah. Okay, so where was I? I broke off there. We were talking about, just made the comment, Teresa. And by the way, several of you have written me very nice emails about the way things are going. I welcome. I've been a salesman most of my life. Hardest sales job I ever had was teaching English. Got to persuade students to do something they really don't want to do. A lot of the time, you never do that in sales, right? You don't try to make somebody buy something she doesn't want. Anyway, I love to hear the good news, but I need to hear, the bad news. If there are things that I was remarking earlier, I give myself barely passing grade on supplying material. I'm a lousy job of that, and I apologize for that. There's no excuse for it. I should have started a month ahead of time. But I really am enjoying, I'm learning a lot from the contributions here, which was my selfish motive. So I was so glad that Cheryl and others made that point about the depth, Cheryl and Teresa and some others, about the depth that comes forth from Faulkner's stories. And that it's not so difficult to understand a lot of this stuff, even though it does in itself. So what about,
Makes it hard to talk about though, because there are so many different layers going on.
it is, and there's, maybe that's a detriment. You make it so difficult with the mixing up of things, and I've sort of glossed that or excused it by glossing it and say, well, this is sort of the imitative form approach. You have a confusing situation, and so you write about it in a confusing way. But of course, that gets to that, what the critics, what I read was called the fallacy of imitative form. You want to write about a boring stratum in society and how boring these people are. You can't write a boring story, right? The story is boring and reflects the boring lives of your character, and nobody will read it. That's the fallacy. And so Faulkner may have a little bit of that, but I think he comes out okay for me. Okay, so who's in control in The Fire in the Heart? Lucas, right? What brings Lucas around to reality?
Well, Molly's gonna walk out.
Black woman, right? She is what makes him come to his senses. And so she has a lot more control. And she just says, sort of like in Lysistrata, when the women say, no, we're not going to have sex with you guys anymore till you quit fighting. You quit warring, quit declaring war and going off to war, no more relations, intimate relations. And here Molly is going to get a divorce. Now, sex has nothing to do with this novel, to this story, I think. One of you want to disagree? Tell me where I'm wrong. I don't think it has anything to do with it when I'm worried about what Lucas and Molly's intimate relationship is like. But we are concerned with the solidity of their marriage. It's a good marriage. I mean, there's a strong marriage. And so for his wandering off the reservation, so to speak, to pursue treasure hunting is really very frivolous, but it's taking him away from her. So she got to do something about it. And we never get into it about whether she really wants a divorce or not. I don't know stories about that. Do you think so? I mean, she's going through, just my imagination, but I think she knew that she could make him come around if she threatened a divorce and push to get to where they get to in this story. And so that he would give up those things and come to his senses and live a normal life. That's why I found it just kind of very funny, very risible that in the end he said, well, I know the money's there. He knows it isn't there. That's me thinking. He knows it's not there, but he's going to save face. He's saying, I have to give up. I'm too old. You go and look for it. I'm not doing it anymore. Give it away. Get rid of it. I know it was there because I saw the churn. I saw the hole where they got it. And it's probably enough for George Wilkins. But again, I don't think Faulkner is poking fun at the uneducated blacks. You know, the whites are uneducated too, right? Not formally educated. What education anyone got, what they got through church structure, or in the case of those who could read, instruction from scripture. I mean, you look at all the allusions Faulkner has to scripture in his writings. And you know, he grew up, I don't think, he was not a Bible thumper, and he may not have even been very religious. I really don't know. But he certainly got his share of instruction. And a lot of it came from the, who is the woman to whom he dedicated?
Callie Barr. She was the mammy, the nanny, the black nanny to not just the Faulkner boys. Faulkner was the oldest of 4 boys, but also when Faulkner had his daughter Jill and married Estelle Oldham, and Estelle had 2 older kids, she became the mammy to those children as well.
Right. Thank you for that. You got her name. But that name appears in the frontispiece, doesn't it? Or in the dedication?
Yeah.
Somewhere. It's in there.
And her funeral was held in Faulkner's parlor at Roanoke. She was a very important part of the Faulkner family.
Yeah. Roanoke is worth a visit. When my wife took our adult daughter 10 years ago on a Rocky Mountain train ride, I didn't want to sit on a train for 2 days. I went south to Oxford. I spent a couple of days there and went through the house, which was nice. It was around the 4th of July weekend, so nobody was there much except the student from the university who was, part of the caretaking, just being there. So I had to run to the place, took a lot of pictures and all that. But really, it was very interesting to see the things that were that they had preserved and put under glass, like his holographic scribblings of the beginnings of certain things, and then to visit his gravesite where any number of miniature whiskeys were left on his grave, and some notes or letters or something.
Did you leave one?
I did. I left a little bit of scotch, and I put Faulkner said at one point in the Wild Palms / Old Man bifurcated novel, alternating chapters, between pain and nothing, I'll take pain. In other words, between pain and death or oblivion, I'll take pain. At one point, somebody asked him if he liked what a writer needed. Well, he needs a little tobacco and some quiet and a little whiskey. By whiskey, I guess you mean bourbon, the interviewer said. He said, well, yes. He said, but between scotch and nothing, I'll take scotch. Worse than death. But a friend of mine once said when we were in college, we hated the scotch. He said, scotch is a man's drink because it takes a real man to drink that awful stuff.
I like it.
Yeah, I disagreed with that later on, but anyway, Faulkner, you were making the remark, someone was making a remark about his stay in New Orleans. And I think it was Cheryl, but I'm not sure. And,
That one was Teresa.
Oh, it's Teresa.
it's Teresa, okay, and his stay there was very short in the beginning of his writing career. I mean, Sherwood Anderson helped him out a little and some other people whose names elude me now. But he had to go back, and just as he did when he visited Paris, he saw it as, it wasn't conducive to what he was trying to do. It was too distracting for him. So he came back to small town roots and wrote about what he knew, which is what successful writers do. Except for those who write the exciting stuff, they got to do a lot of research, like Tom Clancy, or reading all this stuff about submarines and warfare and all the engineering that goes into it, which may or may not interest you. James Michener the same way. Too many words. But he came back to Mississippi, and this. Tell too many stories. I won't tell another one anyway. He was a ne'er-do-well in terms of holding a job. He had a job at the post office for a few weeks, and he quit because he said, "I'm tired of having to get up out of my seat for any son of a bitch who has the price of a 2-cent stamp on him." And he fouled it all up too. He misplaced letters and stuff like that. What else?
I wonder who he conceived of as his audience when he said he wanted to go back to small town to write. Was he also, Cheryl's point, or it may have been Teresa's point, that he was so subtly exposing, he wasn't preaching, he was exposing
Yes.
the terrors of segregation and prior to that slavery and the residue of slavery. Was he really hoping to change the kind of people he was writing about? Or was he looking for a broader audience? I don't know, I just wonder how he thought about it. Did he write anything about
A
that?
conscientious writer who would deserve the term artist, someone who's searching for truth.
Yeah.
Like Keats said, truth is beauty and beauty is truth. That's all you need to know. That's all you know and all you need to know. So if he's searching for truth, then he's focused on truth, and whoever reads it is immaterial. That's why he said this award is given to me as a sort of trust or whatever he said, because it's not important. It's not important about me. What's important is the literature.
But it was the truth about a certain culture. Who did he think of needing to know that?
Well, I think his so-called truths, if we call them that, about exposing the warts as well as the good side, is for people to make their own decisions about what it is. It certainly can apply to other places. There's plenty of racism in the North. Any number of stories written by famous, well-known African-American authors like Hansberry and others about blacks that went to Chicago. They didn't find salvation there much. They found more discrimination. And all the worst race riots, the lynchings were in the South, the horrible stuff that went on, no doubt. But there were race riots, they were all in the North. I mean, in that era, up until through the early 20th century, the race riots were there. And maybe that's because it was much more conducive to it. After all, it was in big cities. We didn't have any big cities in the South, except maybe Atlanta. And Miami wasn't even a big city 100 years ago. So I think my long-winded way of answering that, I don't know if I gave a very good answer, but I think he's trying to pursue truth. And he says a good writer will do anything to get the truth out. He will sell his own mother.
Yeah.
To get it out. That's more important. What's more important is this, and somebody asked him about what was it, Ode on a Grecian Urn. Oh, I know. I said something about, I can't remember the setting now, but it's about truth. He said, ode on a Grecian urn is far more important than any bunch of old ladies. Which was not a misogynist comment. I didn't mean it to be. I guess maybe it was, but more important than sitting around men's club. It's just much more important than that.
Bev, I know that the class is almost over. I just wanted to say that Teresa and I are members of a Faulkner book club, and we found out about this class from Carl Rollison has published. Well, first of all, he has over 50 publications, but he has a 2-part biography on Faulkner, and then 2022 published Faulkner Day by Day. And he never does this, but he shared Bev's class to our group. Like, he doesn't, this is the first time he's ever told us about anything like this. So that's how Teresa and I found the class, and we love it, Bev.
Okay, could you send me information on that and see if you all would consider my membership?
Yeah, it's not, you don't pay for it. It's free on Facebook. I emailed you late last night, so I'll wait for you to check the email. But it's a great group. You learn a lot. And again, for Carl Rollison to post, hey, there's this class by, with Bev Williams, that was a big deal.
What's the last name? Rollison?
Rolllyson.
It's the William Faulkner Book Club, is that it, Cheryl?
Yes, it's on Facebook.
The English department head that I deal with a lot at St. Albans School, African-American woman, mentioned an African-American author who's written something really not so long ago, I mean, just a couple of years ago, about Faulkner, and I can't remember the name now. I'll find it, I'll send it around in case anybody's interested, but it was very much supportive of Faulkner's work. And I thought that was pretty interesting. When I was, your class is over, people can leave if they want, I'm just gonna keep talking. And Greg is.
Thank you, everybody, for joining online.